This is a Hanging by George Orwell. I want to start out this presentation by talking a bit about the author. George Orwell was one of the most well-known authors of the 21st century. You probably read, or were forced to read at least, some of his works at some point. Books like 1984, or maybe Animal Farm. His work was often characterized by an intense focus on the dangers of totalitarianism. He crafted stories that offered biting social critiques of government, warning of the inherent dangers of an unchecked authoritarian state. His collective body of work has permeated cultures around the world and across time, and a lot of that can be owed to its almost prophetic nature. Indeed, in light of recent trends regarding the role of the state, Orwell could be described as a harbinger of what was to come. The fact that we use the term Orwellian when referring to surveillance states and other government practices that run counter to our idea of a free and open society is quite telling. Terms like Big Brother and the Thought Police, all of which he coined, have been assimilated into our vernacular, and even in our own nation, they seem as relevant as ever, particularly post 9/11. But Orwell didn't just write novels, he wrote short essays too. One of those essays was A Hanging. A Hanging was first published in 1931 in the British magazine The Adelphi, when George Orwell was still going by his birth name, Eric Blair. The essay is set in British colonial Burma, sometime in the 1920s. This was a time in history where Britain was still a colonial powerhouse, expanding its vast empire across the globe, routinely taking control of governments in the hope of inculcating the British way of life. British rule in Burma lasted from 1824 to 1948. Orwell served as a member of the British Imperial Police from 1922 to 1927, so the essay was possibly inspired by his own experience. The essay starts out by painting a vivid picture, drawing us in with descriptive language and illustrative details. A prisoner is brought out of his cramped cell by a number of police officers on a sodden rainy morning, as a sickly light, like yellow tinfoil, slants over the high walls into the jail yard. The prisoner is described as a puny wisp of a man, with a shaven head and a sprouting mustache that looked like something straight out of a comic book. No mention is made of the man's name, background, or the circumstances of his imprisonment. The story is told from the point of view of one police officer, who seems to be quite inexperienced in relation to the others. The narrator tells us that the prisoner is being escorted to the gallows, where he is to be executed by hanging. Initially, the narrator appears somewhat indifferent about this ordeal, showing no signs of repugnance at the idea that someone is about to be hanged. But then, something changes. As the prisoner is marched to the gallows, he steps aside slightly to avoid treading in a puddle of rainwater. Something about this seemingly insignificant act resonates profoundly with the narrator. He then reflects. It is curious, but till that moment I had never realized what it means to destroy a healthy, conscious man. When I saw the prisoner step aside to avoid the puddle, I saw the mystery, the unspeakable wrongness of cutting a life short when it is in full tide. This man was not dying, he was alive, just as we are alive. All the organs of his body were working, bowels digesting food, skin renewing itself, nails growing, tissues forming, all toiling away in solemn foolery. His nails would still be growing when he stood up on the drop, when he was falling through the air with a tenth of a second to live. His eyes saw the yellow gravel, and the gray walls, and the brain still remembered, foresaw, reasoned, even about puddles. He and we were a party of men, walking together, seeing, hearing, feeling, understanding the same world. And in 2 minutes, with a sudden snap, one of us would be gone. One mind less, one world less. So what does this say about the law? Orwell was sometimes asked about the inspiration for this essay. Was it based on real events? Did he personally witness an execution that fundamentally changed how he viewed capital punishment? He never really provided an answer. The only thing he said was that it was just a story. But given his experience serving as a police officer in colonial Burma, it's very much possible that this work was at least inspired by real events. We'll likely never know. But this essay, though not as well known as other works of his, falls squarely in line with the cautionary attitude that characterized his most popular works. Reading a hanging, with its solemn tone and brutally honest, emotionally charged language, one is naturally forced to think deeply about the implications of this state sanctioned practice of capital punishment. I first read this essay when I was in high school, and I had to write a paper either supporting or opposing the use of the death penalty. There are certainly valid arguments for both sides, and by no means am I suggesting that rational humans can possibly continue supporting capital punishment after reading this essay. But I vividly remember reading a hanging, and for the very first time in my life asking myself this basic question: why can the government do that? Who gave them that right to just end someone's life, with all their memories and habits and everything that makes them a person? I had always sort of just accepted the idea of government authority and the authority of its laws as a sort of self-proving truth with no need for explanation. It just was, and that was that. But this essay prodded me to approach the role of government with a heightened level of nuance. Later on in our educational journeys, we learned about social contract theory and the role of the sovereign, as we did in this class. But this story has always stuck with me, a reminder that no government act can ever be fully justified solely on the basis of its own legality, particularly when the execution of said act results in the loss of life. Do I think we should pick up pitchforks every time the government does something we disagree with? No. But I do think that there is an important lesson to take from a hanging, regardless of where you fall on the specific issue of capital punishment. That a law is not a divinely ordained immaculate mandate from God. It is a policy written and enacted by humans, and as such can be flawed. Perhaps it would be in our best interest to maintain a healthy level of Orwellian caution when dealing with government actions, particularly those that reside beyond the domain of moral clarity.